pants are awful and you cannot trust them. So you know ancient Rome? Rome gave us a lot of wonderful things like roads and indoor plumbing, bridges and indoor plumbing, calendars and also indoor plumbing. Rome thought that they were a really modern, safe city, so they saw wearing pants as an insult. You wear pants when you need mobility, when you need to get on a horse, when you need to fight someone with a sword, all that good stuff. So Rome thought that wearing pants within the city would be a sign that you didn't think you were safe there. As I'm sure you know, Romans really loved loose-hanging garments. They loved tunics, they loved togas, they loved everything that made you look casual as heck. They thought that this casualness was sort of a sign of power. It's sort of like how Mark Zuckerberg wears shorts and flip-flops to everything to show that he's powerful and he can do what he wants. Romans thought that a truly powerful individual would basically be able to walk into public in their bathrobe and they would still be on top of things. So I envision this glorious future in which no one wears pants and everyone wears dresses. You'll go to interviews only in dresses. You'll see Elon Musk giving a talk on space travel wearing a dress and you'll know that he feels confident. Once in a while you'll walk down the street and see someone in pants and you'll think to yourself, wow, that person must be really insecure. But maybe you're like, Darcy, this does not impress me. Rome was a failure of the city that died because of a bunch of rats with the plague. Give me another reason to hate pants. And fine, I will. Once upon a time, there were these two different spheres of clothing influence. There was male and there was female. Men wore pants and shirts and women wore dresses. And then one fine day, women started also wearing pants. But what's weird is that now even though women can wear pants and dresses, it's still seen as socially inappropriate for a man to wear a dress. I think that's largely because we usually see femininity as a source of shame. Like girls are now taught that they can grow up to be programmers, which is wonderful. But men are still not taught that they can be ballerinas. Because masculinity is seen as the default. And femininity is this thing to be ashamed of, which is really sad. Like right now there's this trend of androgynous clothing, and androgynous clothing is clothing that looks gender neutral. But what's weird about this trend is that it's all just still pants and shirts. So we need this paradigm shift. We've all been wearing pants now for a few decades. Let's go the other way and all wear dresses. It'll even out. But admittedly, none of these are the best reasons for hating pants. But I still have one left and it's a doozy. You will look better if you don't wear pants, and that matters because we're shallow. So right now we're living in this era of ready-to-wear clothing, which is actually really strange and new. Ready-to-wear clothing is clothing that you pick up from a store. So you walk into a Walmart or a Nordstrom or somewhere in between, you pick up something that's kind of in your size and you shove it onto your flesh. And it never fits perfectly because it wasn't made for you. It was made for the average consumer. Throughout history, we never did things this way. All clothing was made for the individual. So if you were wealthy, you would go to a tailor and they would take your measurements and make a piece of clothing for you that fit you perfectly. And if you weren't wealthy, you would take your own measurements and make your own clothes, specifically for you. We are in the age of mass-manufactured clothing right now because of this guy named Lowell, who stole the power loom. The power loom was basically a really fast sewing machine and it started out in England. Lowell decided to go to England and steal it. He memorized all the blueprints and he kind of just stared at power looms for a really long time, and then he came back to the United States and made power looms and sold them. And a few decades after that, we entered the heyday of mass-manufactured clothing. Let me tell a story to illustrate why this is a problem. So in the 1940s, the Air Force was losing a lot of test pilots and a lot of planes, and we could not figure out why. Planes were crashing every day, and we had this horrific loss of human life, and also the loss of this really expensive equipment. The most planes to ever crash in one day during this time was 17 planes, which is insane. So the Air Force brought in this guy named Gilbert Daniels. Gilbert Daniels measured more than 4,000 test pilots across 10 different dimensions on their bodies. And he used all these measurements to come to an average and decide what the measurements of the average test pilot would be. But Gilbert Daniels happened to be this really smart person. He had gone to Harvard. Like all people who go to Harvard, he liked to talk about it all the time, and he was also really good at math. So Gilbert Daniels went back and compared his average measurements to each of the test pilots, all 4,063 of them. And he found that out of 4,063 test pilots, not even one fit within the measurements of the average pilot. So the reason that these test pilots were crashing their planes to the ground was that they couldn't access the controls in the cockpits easily enough. The cockpits had all been made using these measurements of the average pilot, but because the average did not reflect the measurements of the individuals, it was really hard for them to use the cockpit. The Air Force took this information and redesigned all the cockpits to be adjustable, and suddenly there was this huge reduction of crashes. So we were losing way fewer planes, and more importantly, way fewer humans. And this teaches us a lesson about averages in general. This is why it's so hard to find a piece of clothing that fits perfectly, because clothing is designed for the average, but not very many people actually fit in the average. So think about a pair of pants and how many measurements it includes. It includes measurements for hips, thighs, calves, knees, all that stuff. So in this age of mass manufacture of clothing, in which we're all buying clothing from stores, it makes sense to buy clothing that uses the fewest measurements possible because it'll fit us the best. A pair of pants uses a ton of measurements. A dress basically uses one measurement, and that's the waist. The waist has to fit perfectly, but everything else, it's fine. So if you are shopping for a piece of clothing, it'll be way easier to find a well-fitting dress than a well-fitting pair of pants. Do you even lift, bro? Because if so, you probably have a lot of leg muscle, and it's difficult to find pants. Do you have a small waist and big hips? Guess what's going to be easy to find? A dress, because it literally uses one measurement. Do you have a larger waist and smaller hips? You know what'll work for you? It's a dress. Pants. 1. Hated by the Romans. Number 2. Present this false idea of androgyny. Number 3. It's harder to find a good-fitting pair of pants than pretty much any other article of clothing. In conclusion, pants are awful and you cannot trust them. If you would like more anti-pants rants, please subscribe, because there are a lot of other things that I am also unreasonably angry at. Good day.